Buckle up, we're talking about Brownfield Drive today. What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch, making some money investing in fractional real estate online, as usual. If you don't know what Brownfield Drive is, 32 units in Lubbock, Texas. I'm assuming most people that are going to watch this video are going to be people that are either already invested in this or saw the recent big price drop and want to buy into it. This is this the I did an original due diligence video when this came on the platform. I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or so, maybe more recently. I'm not sure. It's one I really wanted to like because I want to buy multifamily. I want to buy Lubbock and Texas in general, but based on a number of factors, and you can watch that and see, what I talked about. I didn't buy it then. I think well, at the current price point, I'm not going to be buying it now. But I've had a lot of discussions with people about it. A lot of people have asked my opinion, and so it's something I think it's interesting. I did dig into it quite a bit to see is there a deal to be had here, and I want to share some stuff because I think that one, I think a lot of people are stuck. I think this is so let me give you some idea of what's going on. There's very high debt payment, and this was actually the number one reason I didn't buy into this. Is it seemed like the property itself could not handle the debt payment. Of course, the co-owner was making that payment, and still is at the moment. And then the property wasn't really performing at market level. It was all the rents or most of the rents were under market, according to the appraisal and the co-owner. They should be able to get up to 950 per unit or more, and at the time they weren't, and they're still not on average. Although recent leases have been at that 950 or above, 992 somewhere. Those two prices are the ones I've seen the most. Um, but in order to make up for that, to be able to sell tokens, the co-owner also agreed to a rent credit and to provide, to continue to pay extra, above and beyond what the property was earning, to pay out a rental yield of 20%. And that was supposed to be until the property performance got up to that level. Well, this month it is not paying out 20%. This isn't even 20% based on a $50. This is a low yield based on the even lower price. Austin. Austin is the co-owner. He basically came into a discussion that we were having in the lounge on the Lofty Discord and said, he just really can't continue to pay it. The property's not working. One of the other investors in this property who had has a very large stake in it had set out a proposal to sell it as soon as he noticed that we weren't going to get paid that yield. And so that started this discussion. There's a whole bunch of people jumped in there. I really was just listening, and I actually was pretty late to it because I don't have I don't have a dog in this fight. This is not a deal I have anything in. Um, Based on the analysis I've done since that call, I don't think that it's one that I'm going to put anything else in, which reminds me, do your own due diligence on all of these. Don't just buy it or don't buy it because I say so, right? You want to look into it yourself. Please like and subscribe. In the description to this video, I have links to all the sites where I'm currently investing in fractional real estate. You want to do your own due diligence on any of those platforms if you decide to use them, and the properties. Just because you see me buy a property doesn't mean that you should. There's also a link to my Discord channel in there where quite a few of us now, I think we passed 90 at this point, get in there on a regular basis, talk about a lot of different platforms, a lot of different properties. So you're welcome to join, talk about this. Although most of this discussion on this, I think, is going to be pretty public in the Lofty Discord. Um, okay, sorry, lost my train of thought there. But there's a discussion that we had. Yeah, based on what I've done so far, I don't think I'm going to buy into this. That's what I was just saying. But for a couple of reasons. So one, Austin basically said, okay, it's not performing. I really can't continue to pay the rent credit. I agree with the other owner. I think we should just sell it. Um, it doesn't, there's still, it's only 75% occupied according to the most recent rent roll we have. There are, I was going to show I actually started recording this earlier, and once I was talking about the rent roll for about 5 minutes, I realized we haven't redacted any of the tenants' names, so I wasn't going to post that. Um, but so, I did some math about it. On average, are the occupy. So only 75% occupied, according to the rent roll, but on average at an $884 per month. Most of the newer leases have been signed at 950 or 992. So that is the highest ones that we've had. But even of those, or of those new ones, there's already evictions happening, and collections and evictions. And so it makes me think that they're asking too much for the units based on the location. One of the things I was worried about when I did this one is, it does not seem like an ideal location. I've always had problems with properties that were so close to the highway. I'm pretty sure I probably mentioned that when I did the longer due diligence video. I mean, I don't know. There could be other things going on. Could be that his team is not great at this. They have, a lot of negative press, and it is press, so you never know how much of it is real. But about some of their other properties, so it could be inexperience there, could be their screening process that they're missing something. And then, quite frankly, sometimes you'll get tenants that figure out, that you can get away with stuff at a certain unit, and they might be slow to evict you or whatever. And sometimes that news spreads, and like certain properties just get a bunch of, professional tenants. I see it a lot less in Texas because if you're, doing everything right, it is pretty easy to evict people, so you don't get that same long stay that you get in some other markets. Um, but uh, that's all I'm going to say about that. But so anyway, average rental rates are still much lower than they were expecting. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about, a couple of things. One is, okay, let's say we sell it. What does that look like? Well, we have an appraisal, and I wanted to mention a couple of things in the appraisal. Uh, and really, too, one of the big issues I think we have is we don't really understand the full story of, and even reading the appraisal of how Austin got this property, it sounds like maybe he only assumed the debt and there wasn't any additional payment. Based on the note in here, and this is, we have a copy of the assumption agreement, and uh, there was like $2.7 million in money that were owed, but this note is now for 2.5. So I think maybe paid the difference of that and then assumed the note. I really don't know. It's one of the questions that I'd want to ask, because if as an owner we were gonna, and I'm just gonna say we as if I'm an owner here. At the moment, I'm not, but it is the position that I'm typically taking, right, when I'm thinking about, okay, what am I doing here? So if we were gonna let him off the hook for it, uh, I want to know that he hasn't just made a ton of money and then we're just selling this, and we're just the bag holders, right? Like, if it is just like an honest mistake and it went way worse than he thought, and he's losing just, right alongside us. Well, maybe that's what we have to do, because I think everybody that bought into it made a somewhat imprudent decision. And so, unfortunately, in my mind, a lot of the signs were there that this was not going to be a deal that worked. I think on top of, I think if everything went perfectly, it could have. But there were a ton of risks, and one being that this note, has a $20,000 per month payment. Austin has continued to pay that. At least that's what we've been told up till now. And so paying that plus the rent credit, is just a huge financial burden, when you have a property that's not performing, right? And so, but so one of the things I want to look at is like, okay, so, oh, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. It's because I did start to record and I trashed that one because of um, the rent roll not being redacted, and because of that, I wanted to, I might say things a couple times because I want to make sure that I got it. That it wasn't the time that I said it before and then deleted it. Man, that was stuttering and terrible, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm just going to keep moving. Um, in the appraisal, the current lender is in the chain of title. It's this Willful Properties LLC. That is a company, I did look up, couldn't find a whole bunch of info on it, but it sounds like what they do is buy a property and then sell it with owner financing immediately. Um, it's something I've done a lot in the past. I've done it mostly with vacant land, but I think it's a good strategy. But when you do it, you almost get you almost always get a good premium for the property, right? And so, um, it makes me question, like, is this 3.2 million? Did that ever make sense as a price? And that was the last sale before, Austin bought it when, when Thundersun Homes is actually his company. And so when Thundersun Homes bought it, um, the way this is described, it sounds like they just assumed the note and the deed was transferred. And I don't know, the way Lubbock puts up their public records, I could find, all the references to them, but I couldn't actually find the documents themselves. That's something, if I were going to be, if I were a big owner in this, I want to look at that and see, like, okay, what did he actually have in this property, right? Because one of the things that was proposed, and I think maybe I said it first, but I think maybe a lot of people were thinking it was, okay, one thing is he still owns a large chunk of tokens. Maybe we just have him burn his tokens, so that makes it so everybody else owns a little bit bigger piece of this. And that could be a good solution, depending on, how much money he's really pulled out of this deal already. Uh, if we think that if it's fair, right? Because, his only motivation at this point is to, one, get out of the obligation of the note, right? I mean, $20,000 a month is huge, and it's set to go up. I'm looking at the wrong thing now, but it's set to go up in 18 months or so. But it's already, $20,000 a month. So I think that he's really motivated to get rid of, that payment. And then the rent credit, I mean, already he said, I just can't afford to pay that. And so, those two things combined, I think just getting rid of that might be worth it, even if he doesn't get any value for the tokens. And so that's where a lot of the discussion was about, like, okay, well, what can we do there? The current proposal is to sell it, and so that's what I wanted to talk mostly about. So, the most recent appraised value was like 3.2 and change, I think. 3.3, excuse me, 3.320. And I think a lot of people are using that in their mind as, hey, this is what we should be able to sell it for. Um, this is when you get the disclaimer. I am a real estate agent in Texas. I am not your agent. I'm not representing you, and this is not my like professional opinion about what this property is worth, because I don't have all the info that I would normally get before I would list this, right? So these are, I'm going to tell you, some of the numbers that I'm looking for, the way that I would look at this if I were helping a client buy it or sell it, what I'd want to list it for. But the real answer is somebody should immediately hire a local agent that sells this type of product, right? Not a realtor that's doing like single family homes mostly. Somebody who has experience with multifamily, understands how cap rates work and all that stuff. And get some BPOs. And I would get two or three of them to come in and say, tell you what you should price this at. If you give an agent good data as far as a rent roll that is accurate, trailing 12 financials that are good, and really, what I like is the last 2 years of financials and trailing 12. Obviously, on this property, they don't look very good, but normally, if you get those pieces of data to your agent, they'll be able to give you a good ballpark. If they're in this business, they're going to they're going to tell you what cap rate this property is going to sell at. If they're in the market, they should be familiar with these properties, right? And so I'm gonna tell you how I looked at it. I'm gonna do some math today to where it looks like to me if I were gonna bring a client in here and try to buy this, um, where some of the things that would be on my mind. But I'm not telling you that this is what I think. This is not my opinion of value. I don't have the data to do that, so I just want to make sure that's clear. So what did I do here? I actually just took the appraiser's pro forma and I put in some actuals here. So at the moment, I'm using the actual rental rate, but giving them credit as if they could lease up the rest of it with that same actual average. Um, and that just gives us the gross potential rent, significantly different than what it is here because he's using the higher market rate. Other income, as far as I could tell from looking through the documents, we don't have other income, so I wasn't sure. I just put nothing in there. If there is some, laundry facility income, or if we're getting some other income that we should be putting in here, obviously that would change us a little bit. Gross potential rent, then taking out 5% vacancy. That's what he used. So I mean, I guess that's market rate there. Again, I'm just trying to rebuild it and then adjust it for the numbers that we have. And so EGI of 322,000. I used his expenses, right? Because one of the things, even though it currently has a much higher management fee, um, as a buyer of the property, right, you wouldn't expect to pay that. You'd pay whatever market rate is, and he used 8%. And I still think that's kind of high for 32 units, but that's what he's got, so that's what I use for my market rate. I used his utility number. I don't know as far as common area utilities what they have. These are four, or it's eight fourplexes, so I don't know. Um, I hope I wasn't saying duplexes earlier, but it's eight fourplexes. So I don't know if there are any common areas, or because it looks like you could just separately deed them if you wanted to. Um, but I left that in there. That could change the numbers a little bit. I put in the real estate taxes from Lofty's page. I put in insurance from Lofty's page, what we're actually paying. I used a repair and maintenance number. Just took his word for those two things, and so that gets us, to under $200,000 in NOI. Value at a seven cap makes this property worth 2.8 million, 2.82 to a buyer currently, if we can't, as an arm length transaction. Well, at the moment, there's $2.5 million in debt. And so ignoring closing costs, I'm just saying, okay, let's say that this is right, but I'm not even taking into account closing costs because this already looks so terrible. That only leaves $300,000 in equity. Well, at the moment, there's just under 20,000 equity tokens, and so that means the value of these tokens, or the value of the property backed by each token, the equity assigned to it is around $16, if that 2.82 number is right. Now, let's say you can get that up to 900. Again, I mean, and as a buyer of this property, I'm not going to pay that. I'm not even going to pay this because it's 75% occupied and there's multiple evictions happening, right? Like, this is if we can get it up to, okay, it's not stabilized because we're not at market rates, but at least it's full and we don't have multiple evictions. So let's say we make that happen, and it's at 900. Okay, well, now at least we get almost a 2.9. Um, again, ignoring closing costs, you've got almost 400,000, but it still only leaves equity of less than $20 per token, the value of the equity that we're holding today. Um, that's a rough spot to be in, and I think it's perfectly possible that some of these things are wrong. Maybe we can actually get more of the units rented, and if it's at 950, okay, then you're bringing yourself up to about $32, right? Because then now at a seven cap, we're getting up over 3 million. But again, we're ignoring closing costs here, right? So I mean, you're gonna. I'm just doing guerrilla math. I'm just trying to like lay out some thoughts. Again, if you have a significant stake in this property, or you're thinking about buying in right now, if it were me, I'd really sharpen my pencil and figure out all these things, right? I would go ahead and dig into every number, see what this really looks like. But it's really hard for me to see how there's any way to sell this property and anyone gets anywhere close to their original investment back, which is obviously, what you'd expect because there's that 5% premium when they sell them originally. But so, okay, what happens if Austin, he says he owns 4,100 tokens. He said he owned over that in the Discord. When I was looking in allo.info, it looks like he has a lot more than that, but then it looks like the next token holder has less. So I don't really know what's going on there. The numbers didn't seem to match up, so I'm just taking his word for it that that's what it was. Because I also think that there's one larger owner that it doesn't look like is showing up on there right either. So um, I'm not a crypto guy, so sometimes I look at those pages and I'm just not reading them right, and that might be going on. But it's something you definitely want to look at, right? Like make sure. But so taking his word for it, let's say he burns those tokens. He says, "Okay, we'll sell it, and I will take nothing from the sale." Uh, what happens then? Well, then you have about 15,000 equity tokens, or almost 16. And okay, if we have that, if we do get it priced at the 3.1 there, okay, then we're getting $40. But again, I mean, I think you'd have to actually spend the time to get it leased up and have your average rent be 850. And I think that because of all the leases in place, it's really unrealistic. So when I was going through what I really thought would probably happen, um, I went with a $900 average rental rate. I think if you fill the vacant units with like 950s and 992s, and you manage to not continue to keep getting evictions of the newly filled ones, you could get your average up to there relatively easily, I think. Um, and okay, so then if that's what it is, then with his burn, if he's willing to burn them all, which I don't know if he should be or not yet. Again, I mean, you really want to dig into the whole situation to figure that out. Then that would mean about $25 per token, net. Again, before closing costs. I mean, and so it might even be. The reason I just did that because one, I want to look at the value of what we're having, right? Like if we're holding it and not selling, and so I don't know. And also it's just late, and I've done way too much math on a deal that I'm certain I'm not buying it anywhere near the price that it currently is. But I'm just trying to help. But so yeah, if you were going to recreate this, probably throw some closing costs in there. Um, get us down to a better number. But and then the other thing I wanted to look at is okay, so he's sold out 15,772 tokens is what it looks like to me, just based on all the outstanding tokens and if he's holding this much. So at an average price of $50, that's 788,000 that he's taken in. Well, and this is part of why I want to understand. Well, what happened when you purchased this, right? Like, did you buy this last year? You paid down that debt by 270,000, and then you put it on Lofty, and then you sold out 750,000, so you got all your money back plus 500,000. But then you've had to like pay all these carrying costs, so you're not really doing that well, but maybe you're still doing way better than the token holders. Like that's why I kind of want to understand that situation, and that those would be questions that I'd want to ask, right? Like that's why I want to understand what that original purchase looked like, what any capex, if they spent money on the property after they bought it to get it up to value. Well, obviously that should be, that value should be included too. But if it's, because you have to remember, it's not that this just isn't working out, is that it's not working out, and the promised rent credit that got people to buy is not being, it's not going to be honored. And so because of that, if it were me, and I'd want, I might even want them to bring some capital to the closing. I don't know, and it might even be worth it to get out of that $20,000 a month payment that isn't, or, doesn't have any associated money and or income. And so I know some of them were sold at a discount. So like if the average was 46, you're still at over 700,000. So that's what one of the things I'd want to try to figure out, because like if it's just a completely honest mistake and he's lost his shirt just like everybody else who's in the situation with him, then okay, maybe we just all move forward together. But if it's a situation where okay, he's up 500K on the deal and we sell it, even just wiping out his tokens, but is not, wouldn't be something I'd be terribly happy with. I'd really want, no, let's just keep holding it and you keep paying us that rent credit, right? I mean, that's, and maybe that's not realistic based on everything else going on in his portfolio. I don't know, but this is, I believe in these types of situations, the way to actually get to a good result is everybody's just going to put all their cards on the table, and we see where things are, and then you can figure out what's actually fair. And obviously sometimes what's fair is not something that's practical or possible, right? Like okay, maybe he did make a bunch of money on this, but it's already sunk into other properties that are having problems. And I don't know what you do there, right? I mean, who knows? I guess, thoughts that I would have would be like, well, maybe we sell this just to get rid of it, to take that obligation off of his plate, and in return, he can't kick some money into the Dow at the moment, but maybe give promises to in the future, and we get a lead on something else. If it turns out that say 500K was moved into another property, right? And I don't know. Again, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he did pay much closer to what it was brought on the platform for. But I think it's important, right? Like, because I want to know uh, that this wasn't just like, okay, let's dump it on here. I pull out a bunch of money. Now we just sell it. Everybody else lost. Like so that's what I try to figure out. Um, in addition to just creating some of those other questions, one of the things people talked about was, well, what if we sell these off as individual condos? It looks like it's, I mean, not condos, but individual fourplexes. The reason I say condos is because one of the things that was floated was, well, maybe we can't, maybe we'd have to subdivide, and if so, it's easier to condoize each fourplex. So I think that's possible, but It's also possible that we can just actually sell the individual buildings. When you looked at the land, I don't know. That's something, if you were going to go that direction, you obviously have to dig into it deeper. But what I did today, I spent some time on homes.com, just looking up every single fourplex I could find that sold in Lubbock. None of these I think are good comps, but it is every single one that sold in the last year. That at least that was reported on there, which is, homes.com is typically pretty good for duplexes through fourplexes. When you get larger, they're not going to have comps, but so I'm not going to use this to try to figure out what it's worth as 32 units. That's why we look at the appraisal and do some numbers. But as far as comping out, okay, if we sold it as fourplexes, well, this is every single fourplex that sold recently. Uh, the average sale was 313,000. The median was 320,000. Uh, and if you don't realize why that gives me some pause, well, let's okay, we have eight of them equals the average times eight. That's 2.5 million. That's the debt, right? And if we do the median times eight, that's 2.56 million. Either one of those situations, we're in pretty bad shape, right? If you sell them off as fourplexes, it looks like maybe you're getting even less money than with the assumptions that we had for the selling them all together. Now, in my experience, that hasn't been the case. Usually, you're going to get more for fourplexes than you are for larger multifamily because the financing is so much better. But in different markets it varies, and 32 units is quite a bit different in size. Like that's usually when you're comparing 4 units to like 8 or 10. Um, but so I did some math around this, just looking at okay, what's the average square footage of those units? These do tend to be a little bit smaller, and so let's see, where did I do this? So I just looked at it over here. Okay, so this is the average size of each fourplex on our property, right? The brownfield fourplexes. If we were able to sell them at fourplexes, there's some math to do to make sure that that's the case. I'm going to just do this right here so we can, um, let's do this here. There we go. So this math is just to show, oh, yeah, let's do that. If we multiplied it by, if we got eight at each of those prices, right? And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, if we sold it at the average dollars per square foot for the fourplex, and we multiply it by our square footage, that'd be like just under 2.7. If we did the median dollars per square foot, 2.9, and the absolute, highest dollar per square foot multiplied by our size, and you just under 3 million bucks. So maybe that's a way to get it sold for a little bit more. But one of the things that you'll find typically is um, usually the highest dollars per square foot correspond with the smallest units, right? And like a lot of markets, people just think, I want to buy a fourplex. I compare them all. I'm not really buying by the square footage. The other thing though is they're also not usually buying by the income exactly, because a lot of them are owner occupied, and so you won't necessarily do a pro forma for each one and buy them that way. A lot of times they're priced just from a sales comparable approach. So this is how I would do it, but I'd normally and this is a pretty wide range too. And so, none of these I think are perfect comps. They range anywhere from 1971 to 2002. Or, I think the subject property was built in like 1991 or something. Couldn't find anything in there. Ours does have garages, um, but it was much less attractive than some of these. Let's see. A lot of these are duplexes, so I'm ignoring the duplexes and only did the fourplexes. This was the first fourplex. Yeah, that's a 1971. Um, oh, okay. Well, I left this up for way too long. But anyway, I think you're getting the point, right? Like, I don't know that selling them off as fourplexes really helps us any. So, because one of the things that people talked about was, okay, well, what if we sell them off as fourplexes just to pay the debt down and then just keep what's left over? Well, maybe if we get the highest dollar per square foot, which I think is questionable, but if we do, maybe you're left with one fourplex if you do that after selling off the other seven. But again, this is not taking into account any sort of closing costs, so any sort of concessions. And and the fact that at the moment our market, and I don't know about Lubbock, but like right now, I pulled up all the sales in the last year. Things are really slowing, and people are expecting better and better deals. So I don't know that selling them off as fourplexes really makes sense. Um, you can do it to get rid of the debt, and then you have one left over. But then okay, so then you have one left over, and then it's oh, where is it? They're all sitting here. You've got 20,000 or 15,000 tokens owning a fourplex. You're still your actual value at the end of that is just not that high. So what is the answer? The answer is I have no idea, right? I think that this is a really tough situation. Um, it's one maybe everybody loses in, right? And the goal is to mitigate that loss. I know there was some discussion, like Tim mentioned, like, hey, look, let's just carry this asset to the point where it does work, right? If we can get to some point in the future, we're all going to be happy to own it, even if we don't get a good return between now and then. And I think generally that's right. One of the things I always talk about is I think if you stay in real estate long enough, you're going to do perfectly fine. Uh, the reason I'm so concerned with risk is, you know, that it's hard to stay in it if you can't afford your mortgage payment, right? And so, we were looking at a lot of different ways to maybe do that, maybe sell new additional equity to pay down the mortgage. I think the problem with that is I don't know that anybody wants to pay $50 for a mortgage token, and so it's really tough to see how you'd get that paid down for new equity without, just further diluting, to an extreme extent, diluting the current holders. I know I'm not going to come in and pay down $50 of debt to get one token when, the current price is 39 bucks, but when I do the math, I think that I wouldn't pay 39 for it, right? I don't think I'd pay, I don't know what I'd pay today. I'd buy them for 5. I think for 5 I mean that's horrible to say, but I don't even know that I want them for 20, right? Because I'm always looking at my downside and, liquidation value. And this was, I still feel like this is a somewhat rosy picture. We're getting right around 20, right? And that is holding it for a while still, getting it, a little bit better. And so if we're going to get it there, so what do we do in the meantime, right? Like we have this $20,000 mortgage payment. Maybe Austin can keep paying that, but not the rent credit. We'll see what happens there. He did mention he talked to his lender. There is, some flexibility on the lender's part. I don't know, when I think about it, of course there is, right? They've already made their money on this property maybe twice. I don't know, but at least once, right? As the owner finance, and then okay, we got that first deal didn't really work out, and so we've got a second person that stepped in, and now they're having a problem. So my guess is the lender really doesn't want this property back. Um, Maybe there's room to for some real negotiation there, to where we can get it down to a payment. I mean that'd be this is that point. The situation is that such that I would be like going back to the lender and saying, hey, can we get a lower payment? Can we cut the interest rate right now? Otherwise, you're probably getting this property back. We can list it for sale, but you know that's the other thing too. 32 unit properties, these don't sell. It's not like a single family home where you list it, you get a couple offers in a few weeks. Like often these are very long, it's a very long process, And again, I think to get anywhere near the prices that we're talking about, you need to have them full, right? I don't think you do it with 75% occupancy. Um, One of the things that I think is probably lost on a lot of people is for any buyer of this is going to have to use a bridge loan. You can't get a conventional loan on a property that's 75% occupied. Even if they get it up to over 90, a lot of lenders want to see that it's averaged over 90% occupancy for the last 6 months or the last, sometimes even a year. Um, and so if it hasn't, that's problematic. If you can't get conventional loan, then okay, you buy it with a bridge loan. You're paying high interest. You get it to a point that it works, then you refinance into conventional debt. You've paid closing costs twice. And so this is all reasons that a seller would not pay the stabilized value, which is what we have the appraisal for, right? Um, I mean, not a seller, a buyer. Why a buyer wouldn't pay that? So I think that I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things that could I don't see how the selling fourplexes to pay off debt. I mean, maybe you don't sell them all to pay it all off. Maybe you sell half of them and then pay off half of the debt, and then the other half. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like that's the sort of thing to work with. But I think a lot of people were assuming what it seemed like, at least in the discussion I've had with quite a few people at this point, is that they assumed the 3.2 or 3.3 is a good sale price, and then extrapolated from that for a fourplex they're going to get 400,000. And just based on the limited research I've done so far, I don't think either of those are good assumptions, and so I think a sale is going to hurt really bad, right? I think it's going to be uh, a big loss for people that bought at 50 or even 45, or even if they got some sort of discount, it looks like it's going to be a big loss. And then even if Austin is willing to burn his remaining equity and just let the other token holders have that, it still looks like, I don't know. I don't know. May I'm just not really sure what you do, right? Like maybe you sell it again with financing again, and the current lender lets you do that, and there's somebody else who's willing to come in and pay too much. Because that's what it looks like happened here, right? It looks like this is just the type of property that it's always going to be problemed because the location just isn't great. It looks good on paper. You'll get people to buy it. The 53,000 per unit that it happened, which was the price point, in 2021 or whatever it was. Maybe add 20K for the renovations per unit, and you're 75, 80. Maybe that's a real number, not 100,000 per unit. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think that it's kind of bleak. I don't mean to like just paint this ugly picture. But one of the things that I've just talked about lately is I'm going to just try to be, as open and blunt as possible whenever I'm talking about any of these deals, because my goal is for all of us to make money, right? And so the only way we're going to do that is if we're looking at deals realistically, actually digging into numbers, not making decisions before we really get what the outcome of that decision is going to be. Um, because I think that it is, I mean, even at 3.2 million, right? Even if you get it to 3.2 or 3.3 after closing costs, you're still not going to be doing amazing on a per token basis. I mean, maybe then you do if you burn some token or have him burn some of his or maybe all of his until people are even. But I don't even know if you do that. And the problem is that you know uh, one, again, the 5% increase, right? The premium, which I'm fairly certain this had, right? We had that on this. Yeah, it was brought to the market at that premium, and then on top of that, the everybody paid fees. I mean, those are just gone, right? And it just hasn't. I think that they did. Maybe there's some operating reserve, or maybe that got sent out. Yeah, there's some operating reserve there, right? So okay, that's something. That's like almost a buck a token for everybody. But but also too, it's going to be continuing to lose money as they're moving forward with the sale. And so, is Austin willing or capable of eating that? That's something to figure out as well. So I don't know. I just want to throw all those thoughts out there, throw the little bit of math and research that I had done. I think this is the kind of deal like this is the kind of deal I like the most. I'm a very big fan of small multifamily. I worked in the multifamily on and off that sector quite a bit. And I think that it is just one of the things about it. It's just very cut and dry, right? Like it's not like commercial where you can like, oh, if we attract the right tenant, there's just not nearly as much room to get creative, right? Um, I mean, maybe you could, right? Maybe could you turn some of these into Airbnbs? Could you turn some of them into rent by the room? Um, Maybe, but they're two bedroom, one bath units. So rent by the room. I don't know what you're doing there. Maybe you can turn them into a third, and are there ways to make it work? I think possibly, without figuring out a way to address the debt. The property is just not throwing off enough income. Um, right now, so 163,000 was their annual gross rents when it's this month. 163, 106 divided by 12. Yeah, less than $14,000 in top line revenue with a $20,000 mortgage payment. Um, Top line revenue. So that, I don't know. I think that there's just a really long way to go to make this a deal that works. And the problem is too, is you're stuck with that debt. Like, one of the things, and I forgot to mention this earlier. One of the things people are like, well, let's just refinance it. Like this loan's terrible. Let's just refinance it. Well, it's in commercial, which this size multifamily is considered a commercial mortgage. You can't just refinance these deals without having a stabilized property, right? You'd have to go out and get another bridge lender, and they're going to say, well, what's the story? What's going to make it different this time? You had you had a year already, I think, right? When did this happen? Um, yeah, it's been over a year. It hasn't gotten up to speed in that year. What's going to happen differently over the next year? The economy's not better than it was. If you don't have a good story about why your team's better, I think it's very unlikely you get a new bridge loan. Um, Historically, bridge lenders hate refinancing out other bridge lenders, right? Like the goal is you use that bridge loan to get to, agency debt, the type of loan, or long term, basically, a longer term, more conventional lending. Um, but you can't do that without having a good rent roll, a decent trailing 12. The most aggressive lenders are going to want to do, your trailing 12 expenses and your trailing three income annualized. And, when we just looked at this last month's annualized, well, you're just not getting a loan against this property like that. Um, but like I said, I mean, maybe this lender it's not, some big institution. It's somebody that Austin was able to get on the phone, uh, probably understand. My guess is he doesn't want the property back, right? I don't know. I wouldn't, right? Like if it's, I'd much rather be getting a very nice mortgage payment than get the property back. So maybe there's some deal to be cut there. Um, Maybe it's a forbearance. Maybe it's and that's a forbearance is like, you get to skip basically skip some payments and then put them on the end. Maybe that gives you some breathing room to get the property, up and running properly to where you could refinance it, or maybe a negative amortization mortgage where we keep making some payment, but we're not making the full payment. Like maybe we're paying 10K a month and adding the other 10K, with the thought again that, okay, that's been adding to the mortgage, but we should be able to refinance out once this is actually stabilized. Um, but that's assuming stabilization is possible, right? And at the rental rates that we're looking at. And one of the things is like, some of the new tenants are already being evicted. Uh, and some of the discussion in the the call we had about this was, well, maybe that's just because people just don't, you're trying to charge too much for these units, and people realize the value is not there once they get in there, right? Like because of the location, maybe it's noisy, maybe maybe these have to be cheap units in order to stay full. There's plenty of parts of town and plenty of markets that's true, right? Like you want your units to be full, you want to have good occupancy, you just have to be cheaper because even though when you do your comp analysis, it looks like you should be able to rent them for more. You really can't because those ones have that, or the other thing going for them that you don't have. So um, I don't know. Hopefully some of this was helpful. I just wanted to share, ideas in general around this and the things that I'd be thinking about. Definitely not giving anyone any advice on this one because I don't know what the solution would be. I mean, I think, like I said, I mean, I think people are pretty stuck right now. I think that, the I almost made it all the way through without it freezing, but I didn't. The only last thing, that I wanted to mention is if I were looking at holding this for the long term, any or trying to plan to do that, the only other thing that I'd want to do is figure out, okay, what does our long term debt look like once we refinance this, right? Once we do get it stabilized, if we do figure out how to handle the debt that we have in place right now, what can we reasonably expect to pay off the lender? Um, when we are paying them off, and if because one of the things that I worry about, like if we think about what these units will actually rent for, right? If the stabilizing market, if the stabilizing rate for these is not 950, let's say they have to be 899 to get tenants that are just going to be good payers and stay and be happy with this location. Well then, what's our, based on that rent roll and that income, what's a new lender going to give us? And is it even going to be enough to pay off the current mortgage? So that's one more piece that I think if I, owned a big chunk of this, I'd probably be calling some commercial lenders in addition to, so like I said, I mean, I'd want to get some BPOs, right? Which are just broker price opinions. So go to two or three commercial guys in this market or ladies that do this sort of thing regularly. Um, get them to tell you what they think this would sell for and how long that's going to take, because a lot of them are going to tell you, or some of them will, this is going to be a 9 month marketing period. Don't expect to get offers right away. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's true in a lot of markets. Probably also get a residential realtor to come out and tell you what they'd sell those fourplexes for, right? And then get some clarity around, okay, what's Austin's situation really? Did he make a ton of money off of us, or did he actually have more into this property than it looks like just from looking at this stuff? And he's just as bad off as us, and it's actually been amazing that he's been continuing to make that rent credit payment as long as he has, in addition to the mortgage, when there's just clearly not the money coming out of the property. I think either one of those could be true, and I don't know which is right. And it's maybe it's somewhere in between, right? Maybe that's most of those payments came from the sale of tokens. But I'd want to figure that out, because I think trying to come up with a solution I'm happy with, I'd want to know like how much I'm really going to ask him to kick in, or whether it's all his tokens, some of his tokens, he keeps paying the mortgage for a certain, whatever the answer is. I think, it's hard to know what to ask for if you don't know really what the situation is. And this is one of the things that I've been talking about a lot, right? Where we're expecting co-owners to pay mortgages, we're expecting them to pay rent credits, but we're not being given any information about their ability to do that, right? Like what do their finances look like? Like we know he has some other problem properties. Obviously, uh, you have to take that into account, right? I mean, if he says if it really looks like a lot more went into this than it does on the surface, then well, maybe just wiping out his ownership, it makes sense. And even maybe that is like, maybe that's a little bit too cruel, depending on what the deal actually looked like on his end, right? But even if it is, at the same time, it's the deal. We're not getting the deal as token holders that we originally signed up for. So maybe it's still the right thing to ask, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think all of these questions need to be answered before a good decision could be made about it, right? Like, I mean, what do they actually sell for as fourplexes? How long is that going to take? Yeah, if it was one or two, you might be able to sell them pretty quickly. But if you look at that list of comps, that was literally every single fourplex that sold um, in Lubbock, at least on the MLS, in the last year. Oh, what did I do with that? Oh, here it is. And that was what? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10, 9. It's only 9. I don't know how I counted 10 there. It is late. Um, so you're basically having a whole year of supply of fourplexes that you're listing if you just put those up for sale. So understanding the timing of selling, all of that, I think, is something that in order to craft a plan that makes sense, those are all questions that need to be answered. Um, and my worry is, we do this with a lot of the properties on Lofty, is people just like, okay, I know I've talked about this a lot lately. they're just not really doing the math when making their decisions, right? And it's like, I think any proposals that we see about properties like this really need to have, all that detail in the backup of like why this makes sense, why it doesn't, what are our options, what do those really look like? Um, because yeah, I mean, selling it uh, might make sense, but it might be, there's some way to do a little bit better than that going forward. That might take some real work with the lender. I mean, I don't know. Um, I guess one more thing that I'd want to do is talk to a local property manager, just a third party property manager, and find out what they think they could do with the property, right? Like, um, so this size property, maybe they'd manage it for 5 or 6%, get them to tell you what their rental rate would be. Um, Maybe this looks a lot better under a professional third party manager with a low, obviously, that lower rate, Austin's getting the higher rate right now because he's paying the mortgage. But if there's, depending on what's going on there, maybe that changes, and so that the actual property itself could perform a little better. So I don't know. All of those things are things I'd be thinking about. None of those are going to be easy solutions. I think, all of the little holders in this are really lucky that you have one big holder. Somebody who's got a lot of skin in this game, and he's also someone who's active on the platform, and motivated to really figure it out. It does sound like Austin wants to find a solution as well. It seems like he's really got his hand full. At least, just that's the impression I got from the discussion yesterday. I don't know. I think that's really everything I wanted to say about all of this. Um, Mostly that, just trying to bracket the thought process a little bit, give you some of the reasons why I think some of the solutions we're talking about maybe don't make sense, or maybe you're going to end up being a lot worse than we think. But the only way to find out is to really move forward and engage some of those professionals in the marketplace and figure out where we'd stand on all of that, and then understand that like whatever they tell us, it's probably going to end up being a little worse at the end of the day because um, it's just how the world works, right? Now I've rambled for way too long, and since I always show my clock here, people call me out for doing these in the middle of the night, and this one's super late, so sorry about that. Um, Feel free to tickle the like button. Feel free to jump in my Discord and talk about this one, just the generic fractional real estate investors one I have set up. The link to that is in the description of this video. I think I'm probably going to post this in the Lofty Discord. I try not to spam it there, but this is one that a lot of people have asked me about this property, um, and it seems like there's openness to some discussion and additional info about it. So I don't know. Hopefully this is helpful if this is where you saw it. And that is it for me for today. So until next time, I will keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.